All right. Well, I am excited that you're all here today. I do have a little bit of a cough, so I'm gonna keep a cough drop in, and hopefully it's not too distracting. But today we're gonna be talking about those hard conversations that are sometimes really difficult with family, friends, coworkers, in just everyday settings. And how do we, go to a family dinner without throwing mashed potatoes at each other? So that's kind of like where the title of today's presentation came from. Um, so we're gonna talk about first identifying like what causes the conflict and then we're going to talk through like the skills that you can get through it and come up with a plan for how to navigate that moving forward and what does that look like. I'm hoping we get through all of that, but we're going to do our best. So, first of all, and this is a spot where like if you have ideas to add to this, please feel free to throw it in the chat or jump in and tell us. So I think I have pulled a couple of different groups of people and asked like what causes conflict, particularly around the holidays, like what do you see coming up? And these are the things that came up the most often. So difference in political views, difference in religious views, unmet expectations or traditions, disappointment in general, plans not going as planned or as expected, hunger. That one actually came up a lot. Grief. Oh, that's a great one. Thank you, Amber, for sharing that. That was in the chat. Any others that anyone can think of, like what else comes up that can create that conflict with family, friends, coworkers? Um, History of mistreatment, great example. Absolutely. Split family, yes. Traveling to different cities to please others, for sure. That I think also goes with that like unmet expectations. Your family might expect you to be with you, but or with them, but then you have to be elsewhere, for sure, complicated. Any others? Addiction, absolutely. Good. We got a smart group here today. Good. If you think of any others, feel free to just throw them in the chat and we'll take a look at those. So, where to start? So when we're looking at walking into a situation that we know has potential to bring conflict, we really want to start with stop. So this is a skill. All the skills we're going to talk about today are based on dialectical behavioral therapy, and can be found all over the internet. We're specifically going to be talking mostly about the interpersonal effectiveness skills, but we're going to start with stop. So this is an acronym: stop, take a step back, observe, and then proceed. And when we do that pause, when we slow ourselves down and we take the time to observe what's going on during that pause, we want to focus on taking some deep breaths, observe the situation without judging the situation. We're just looking for, okay, what's the facts? What's reality? What's not reality? And if we need to, we can walk away from that situation. If you're in a situation you can't walk away from, then trying to find different ways to engage whatever you need to calm your body down. So having something to fidget with, having a really strong flavored like mint or sour candy. Like I know people who carry warheads in their pocket just for that, or like a tin of Altoids, something along those lines. So I think anything along those lines to just keep you in a space where you have access to something that quiets down that response that like comes up with conflict. So starting with that and knowing that you have the ability to kind of navigate that pause. And being able to do that without judgment helps us to kind of see the situation more objectively. Sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in the emotion of everything that's going on. So being able to kind of take that step back is a really helpful thing. Okay. So how do we untangle all those thoughts that are in our head and communicate with people when we want to effectively talk about what our expectations are, our boundaries, what we're hoping to see happen? So when there's something happening, and we want to be able to navigate that situation, and communicate to someone that we want to be able to see a certain thing happen. This is another acronym. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is acronyms. And this is a way to kind of navigate, um, kind of provide a script for how to do that. So we're looking at DEAR man is the acronym. So describe, express, assert, reinforce, be mindful, appear confident, and negotiate, don't manipulate. So let's talk about what all that means. So we're talking about describing a situation. We're talking about just being able to state what's going on, like state what we see happening and be objective about our description to the other person. We're not adding our opinion or interpretation at this moment. We're just giving a statement. As in scripts, we'll go over in just a minute. So express, then we express that how we feel about it. So how we're going to express our feelings to the other person and let them know how we're impacted by that situation. When we assert, we're going to be direct and clearly state what it is that we need. What do we need from that situation, and how can I be really clear about that request or that expectation for that other person? And as we reinforce, we're going to be really positive in our praise as we thank them for their willingness to help, or even just like I really appreciate it when you do things like that, or thank you for for listening. We're going to just reinforce that response. Okay. As we go into it, having some ability to use our mindfulness tools and being mindful really in this situation, what we're looking at for a definition of mindfulness comes to being able to manage our emotional response through being present. So I'm paying attention to what's going on around me. I'm able to quiet down my body and my mind by taking deep breaths and listening to the sounds in the room around me. I'm able to find something that I can put in my mouth to like pay attention to like how it feels. And it's not just a matter of like mindlessly throwing something in our mouth, but paying attention. So actually paying attention to how it feels in your mouth or how it feels on your tongue or how the room smells or what the sound is. So giving our attention to some of that. And as we do that, that helps us kind of calm down that fight, flight, or freeze response when we're having these conversations. And going into it appearing confident really helps us be confident. And so, going into it knowing that like I'm gonna be really bold in my body language. I'm not going to like cower. I'm going to show that I look confident. I'm going to use a tone that appears confident. You might be a little shaky and a little bit anxious, and that's okay. That's where some of that mindfulness comes in. And preparing using the script can be really helpful. Okay, now let's talk about negotiation versus manipulation. So, manipulation would be things like, expressing what it is that you need and going through all of that and then saying, but if you don't do it, then I'm not going to blah. Or if you don't do it, then I'm going to blah, whatever that looks like. So those kinds of threats or like, if you love me, you'll do this, those kinds of communications actually create a space where you're now manipulating the situation instead of trying to negotiate. So negotiation would be things like, if you're asking someone to make dinner because it's been a long day for you and you need them to make dinner, like an example of a negotiation in that situation would be, I'll do the dishes if you'll make dinner. That would be really super helpful. I'm just really tired today. And going from there. Um, Part of all of that is also just managing our own expectations going into the situation, knowing that we cannot control what another person does or says. It is entirely up to them how they respond. And so part of the reinforcement and really being assertive in this situation is being able to kind of sound like a broken record. Like I understand like where you're coming from on that, and this is really what I need and what I'm going to kind of hold to. If you can negotiate, do, but if there are things that really are kind of non-negotiable things, holding your ground in that situation can be really important. And again, we can't control how they respond. And so it comes back to how are we going to respond and making a plan for that. So that's a lot of information. And like I said, we have some scripts we're going to go through, but does anyone have any questions up to this point? Okay. If you do, just pop them in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on it, but I know I've missed a few things here and there. So, okay, let's talk about some of these scripts. So like, let's go through a couple of them. So let's say you're going to a family party, a party with friends, whoever it is, you're going to an event, and there is a specific topic that you're not interested in bringing up or talking about with that particular group of people. I intentionally left that blank because I think it's important to think about this in a broad way, and also like there's certain topics that can be kind of triggering for people. So we'll just look at it in a broad way. So first, describe. I'm not interested in talking about blank at the party. That's just a blank statement. That's a very flat, like that's just something I'm not interested in doing. I feel frustrated when we talk about it. And since we'll be together, will you help me by not bringing this topic up and respect my request to change the subject? So we're describing what it is that we need or what it is that we'd like to see happen. We're talking about how it feels for us when we talk about that thing. And then we're also asserting, we're asking, like, hey, I could use your help on that, right? And then reinforcement, like, I'm so glad you'll be on my side. Thank you for helping. Just as simple as that. Or if they say, no, I really like to talk about it, that's where you can kind of hold your ground and like I'm not willing to engage in those conversations and kind of hold that boundary and reinforce what it is that you need from that situation. Okay. Um, so the comment in the oh, this is good. Let's talk about this. So the comment was mentioning being on my side would only cause more division in my family because there's already side taking. Great observation. And that's why um, a lot of this is just examples. You have to adapt it per situation. So I'm really glad you brought that up because that might not work. So another way to say that would maybe be, thank you. I'm glad we're on the same page and thank you for understanding. I'm glad you brought that up because it may not sound the same. And to some people, that might be a way to like help that other person feel like you are on the same side of things and like it's like an ally and would feel really comfortable to them. But for others, that wouldn't. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Monty. That's really a great way to look at the other perspectives because making that comment might not feel comfortable to some people and in some families. So great comment. Thank you. Okay, another one. So let's look at this one. So going into the holidays, this actually came up at the beginning, right? We're talking about like trying to navigate like different family situations and things, having to go to one family or another. So we're also talking about like those expectations. So let's say decorating the Christmas tree is really important to you, and you really need to be there when that tradition happens because it's so important. And this is again just an example. I'm juggling multiple requests for the holidays, and would really like to prioritize being there to decorate the tree. It means a lot to me to be there and helps me feel connected to the family traditions. Will you please plan to decorate the tree when I can be there? And if they say yes, great. Then that means so much to me. Thank you. If you have to go back to the negotiation phase, this is just an example of how you might negotiate in that situation. I know I'm busy, so I'm willing to prioritize as long as you call me when you're scheduling. So instead of just saying, will you schedule it when I can be available? Here's when I'm available. Like, okay, well, at least when you're scheduling it, will you call me so I can maybe move some things around and be present, right? That's going to feel different than like, nope, it needs to be when I can be there because there might be some wiggle room for negotiation on that one, right? Whereas on the previous one, that particular topic might just be a complete non-start, no go for you. And so there is no negotiating. Or it might just be you have to say, I'm going to leave the room if it comes up. And so this is one that maybe there could be some negotiation, or I at least want to be there for for most of it. So wait until you put the ornaments and the star on until I get there. You can put the lights on or whatever. So having those negotiations and that conversation can be a part of that. And helping kind of work through that. So the question in the chat, I'm not sure how to approach a negotiation versus manipulation, like clear boundary setting, because I practice these things with clear boundary setting, but a lot of the time that means if you're not able to respect this boundary, then I will need to leave, which is now kind of feels like a manipulation. I'm just unsure of the difference. Really great question. That's actually an excellent boundary. Because a lot of times that is what it comes down to. That's how we can protect ourselves in situations where other people aren't willing to hear us out and talk through things. Saying that you're just going to leave the room is actually a really healthy way to navigate a boundary. I wouldn't call it manipulation. Manipulation more like tugs on the emotional strings, like threatening to do something or threatening to say something that could potentially harm or hurt another person. And I also think that like when you're holding a boundary and your expectation in that boundary is you need to leave, then that's not actually holding a boundary. That's another expectation for the other person, and you don't have any control over that. So people get really frustrated. We're going to talk more about boundaries in just a little bit, but I'm glad you brought that up here because I think it's important to kind of navigate those two things. Manipulation really comes down to like trying to like kind of tug at the emotional strings and make people feel guilty. I mean, there's more to it than that, but like With boundary setting, it's and negotiating, it's more like, okay, let's talk about like some give and take, what's doable here, and how can we kind of work through that. So hopefully that kind of clears that up. So great questions. You guys are doing great. And if you want to jump in and ask a question out loud, you can do that as well. So don't hesitate to jump in. Okay, so there's some examples. But when we're coming up to all of this, it really comes down to, okay, great. Now I have a script, but how do I show up in that conversation for that other person? And how do I show up in that conversation for myself? And so that's kind of where I want to like shift the focus. Is like, so now we have a script, and like I know how to describe it. I can express what I need. I can ask for what I need. I can reinforce that. I can negotiate some things. I can show up and be really like bold and brave. Um, but like, how do we do that? And that's where things can get kind of complicated when we're looking at these interpersonal relationships. And so the next skill we can talk about is the give skill. So when we're talking about this particular skill, this is about how do we show up for that other person in that conversation in a way that's going to help them feel comfortable as we have this conversation. Talking about boundaries, talking about expectations, setting those the tone for that can feel really uncomfortable at times. And so, in order to really kind of navigate those situations, we ourselves have to be prepared to kind of show up to that conversation in a way that doesn't come across as defensive or harsh or critical, because it's not about judging that other person, it's about us communicating what we need in that moment. So we want to show up in a gentle way. So basically what we're looking at with that one is like going into a conversation and like rolling your eyes at that, or like having your like arms crossed and being really like closed off doesn't invite people to kind of engage in that conversation when we show up that way, or like clicking your tongue at them, like that's a thing that happens in my family sometimes. I am an eye roller, I will admit that, and I will own it. During the pandemic, people would say all the time, like, "Oh, I'm so glad I have a mask on my face. You can't tell what's happening." That was never the case for me because when you're an eye roller, it didn't help. So being able to kind of show up in a way that like you're managing that. So, check your face and your body language, that can be part of that. And then being interested in the other person's perspective in all of this is also part of it. So how do I show up in a way? Sorry. How do I show up in a way that indicates to them that I'm interested in what they have to say? Um, so, asking questions, engaging in what you're hearing from them, and really showing that interest. Part of that is through that body language as well, leaning forward and being open and able to kind of engage in that way. We're going to talk more about validation on the next slide, but we want to make sure that we're validating what we can from what the other person is saying, and also validating our own needs in those moments as well. And again, showing up with an easy manner. I know not all family dynamics allow for this like kind of lighthearted and like I don't know, easy approach. So, again, be thoughtful to what your situation needs in that moment, but being able to really be interested in what the other person has to say and be gentle about our approach can be very helpful. Validation, I think, is incredibly critical when we're trying to engage in these hard conversations. So we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But the easy matter, kind of coming in it with, you know, just a relaxed space, and tell a joke if you can tell, not like a like formal joke, but like make it kind of like light and funny if you can. But if that's not your personality with that person, don't try to be something you're not either. It's a really good idea to show up authentically who you are. So, okay, any questions about this one before we move on to validation? Okay, let's talk more about validation. What I hear the most often when I talk about validation is that people are afraid that by validating the other person, that they're going to automatically assume you agree with them. So let's talk about what validation really looks like, because it's not about agreeing with them. It might be that you might actually agree with what they have to say. And if you do, then great, agree with them, because that's the authentic approach, right? But when we're looking at validation, what that really means is we're just actively listening and we're paying attention. Sorry. Again, our body language matters in that moment. So, what am I doing to show that person that I'm really listening? I'm putting away my phone. I'm not trying to multitask that conversation. I'm really taking the time. I'm not rushing it. So, planning a time to actually have that conversation can be really validating to the other person. Because if we just throw an expectation at another person, like, hey, by the way, this is what I need and let's make it happen, but I don't really have time to talk about it, isn't going to feel very validating to that other person in the conversation because they may have some really valid points that they want to be able to talk through. Um, and it's always good to validate their emotions because you can't control another person's emotions. And what they feel about a situation is always valid because that's their emotion and that's their feeling. The reason for the emotion might be something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, and that's okay. That doesn't mean we're going to validate their reasoning, but the emotion is something we can kind of pay attention to and just like actively give our attention to. Then we're going to reflect back. So if they say to you, like, I know that you want to be there for the tree decorating, like you're just so busy. Like I hear you, I know I'm really busy. So you're reflecting back that you heard what they said. Like, I know I've been really busy this season and it's been really hard to get a hold of me, right? You're just reflecting back what they said. You're not apologizing necessarily or saying anything that you don't need to, but just acknowledging that you heard what they said. Pay attention to their body language as well. Most of the time these conversations are happening with people we know fairly well. So, if they like are doing well and then they suddenly just like cross their arms and sit back, that might just be them being comfortable because you know them, or that might be their signal that they're closing off. So, paying attention to that body language from them is important as well. Um, sorry. The next step would be just acknowledging what is valid. Um, they might bring some points to the conversation that really are valid. Um, like I want you there for the tree decorating as well. And we also have like 14 other people that have asked to be there too. And it's going to be really hard. So acknowledging that it is complicated is an important part of that. One second, sorry. Okay. So that's part of it too, is just being able to recognize what in the conversation that they just said is valid and what in their statement is valid. It doesn't mean you're specifically calling out what isn't valid or what you see as invalid. Right now we're just focused on like how do we help them feel like you're hearing their side of the story and their side of the conversation. And then another part of that is that showing equality. This one I think applies in so many situations. Um, I think when someone comes to us with something or we go to them with something, we're trying to talk through things. If we get to a point where, um, you know, we're kind of going back and forth on these things. If all we're doing is like, well, my day is so much busier than yours, and like things for me are so much harder, and I have so much more on my plate than you do, it gets to a point where it's really hard to kind of communicate at that point because now that person is no longer feeling like they're being heard because you're just trying to one up their chaos and their busyness or their experience. And so when we're trying to like one up somebody or like no, my life is so much harder than yours, and so we're trying to like one down it. Um, it gets really overwhelming and no longer feels like a conversation. It's just kind of it feels more like an attack. So when you're validating, just remember that doesn't necessarily mean you agree. We're just acknowledging what they're saying, not necessarily agreeing with it. It doesn't mean we have to like what they're saying. Again, we're just acknowledging what they're saying and hearing what they have to say. Um, and remember that every response makes sense in some way. So they wouldn't be responding that way if there wasn't a reason for it. It doesn't mean we have to agree with the reason, again, but understanding where things are coming from and why it's happening is part of that really good, like active listening and reflecting back and trying to understand. So, any further questions about validation or comments? Okay. Um, really getting into a space of validating is kind of like learning a whole new language at times. So it can be really awkward and clunky when you first start doing it. And so really being able to kind of get to that place takes practice. Oh, and another thing I was gonna say about that is it's all about the and both rather than trying to like dismiss another person. So if we say, I understand you're feeling frustrated, but all we're doing is we're negating that like understanding statement. A way you could say that would be, I hear you that you're frustrated, and I also really would like to be there too. So we're shifting that but we have to shift the way that we say it as well, and like really understand that both of those things can be true. So. All right. So now we've talked about like how do we show up for that other person, but showing up for ourselves is also a really important part of this conversation. Like, what do I need to do for myself in this situation to really be fair to what's going on and be thoughtful about, what I need in that situation. So, to be fair, we're really looking at both perspectives, and being able to say no if we feel like that other person is taking advantage of us. Like in that negotiation, if we feel like, okay, hold on, I'm just like negotiating away everything that I came to talk about, that's not really fair to ourselves. And so we have to be able to like pay attention to that and be ready to like hold firm and say no where we need to say no. Apologies is something else that I see really regularly. Like, I'm really sorry to even ask, and like, or I'm sorry, like I'm getting in the way. It's okay to be present in those conversations, and it's okay to take up space. And so, really allowing ourselves to show up without apology, um, is a big part of it. And a lot of times people feel like in order to validate another person, we have to apologize for asking something hard. And we don't. So there's nothing in what we've talked about so far that warrants or requires an apology. If you step on someone's toes, sure, definitely apologize for that. Like it's like even if it was just a mistake, like whoops, sorry. That's different than like just apologizing for, standing in line. I hear that a lot too. So just be thoughtful about like you deserve to be present in that space as well. So don't over apologize and minimize what's going on. So there was a question in the chat. What do you do if someone consistently uses the cognitive distortion of emotional reasoning? Um, that is tricky. And that's where like really sticking to your guns is important. So if they're just coming at you with emotion, 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 and they're making all their choices through their emotions, it's okay. That's where we like find the valid, right? I understand that you're feeling frustrated right now. I can see that you're really sad about the situation. I appreciate you sharing that you're feeling sad. And in order for my needs to be met, I also need this. And so we're recognizing that they're sad. We may not agree with their reasoning for being sad or their reaction because to us it may seem really irrational. But that doesn't mean we can't look at it and kind of hold fast to what we need. That's why this piece is really important, this fast skill. So fair, apologies, stick to your values and truthful. That's where we can kind of guard against some of that. Um, and Evelyn, if I missed the mark on what your question was, please feel free to clarify. But when those people come at us, when people come at us like with an emotional response all the time, and they're constantly living in that like emotional brain, it can get really overwhelming and feel like we're being manipulated in those situations, which that's probably part of the intention, whether on purpose or not. And so that's where like really knowing how to plan for that and having that script can be really helpful. I have the script, I know what I need to stick to, I know what my negotiables are. And even if this person comes at me that way, I am going to be able to like hold tight to that and be strong. So that's where like we have to be remember that we deserve to take up space. So it's okay to be fair to yourself and not overly apologize. And so the next one on there is stick to your values. Take time before you go into these hard conversations. And what do I value? Do I value this friendship more than I value the avoiding that topic of conversation? Do I value being present at that family tradition more than I value this relationship in times? And so we have to be able to decide like what's the most valuable thing for me in this, and what do I really need out of the situation? So being able to kind of negotiate some of that. And the more we understand what we value and the more we understand like where our values kind of start and stop and like what's the most important, the better able we are to kind of stand up for ourselves and like, no, I really value being able to stay connected to the family through these family traditions. And I'm going to hold firm to that. And that's something I really need to stick to. And then the last one, this one also kind of connects back to that manipulation piece, is being honest about how you really feel about it. So we're not going to exaggerate or manipulate or lie about things, or just like tell a half truth or kind of the truth. That's where some of that manipulation kind of comes in. So I think that that's a big part of that. So let's add another question in the chat. Um, so on this one, Brooke, will you take a look at that one and just give me a quick summary? Sorry, Amber. Thank you for sharing, though. I really appreciate that. Um, Brooklyn, sorry. Um, and then, okay. So we're looking at going into these hard conversations. Being ready with this Dear Man, Give, and Fast can help us kind of have the tools that we need. Hang on, I'm just gonna read this comment really quick to myself and then I'll give a quick summary. Okay. Amber, thank you for being willing to share such a vulnerable story. I really appreciate that. I'm not going to read it out loud since this is being recorded, but grief can be something that can be absolutely overwhelming. Um, Feeling stuck in a situation like that makes so much sense to me. It takes time to work through it, and it might be years and years and years before you're really able to enjoy those kinds of events. Um, and so, yeah, it might really feel like that for a long time. In terms of being able to kind of hold your ground with his family, this is where boundaries get to be so important, and being able to communicate like, hey, this is, describe what it is that you're needing in that moment, express how it feels when things happen the way that they do. Um, and also understanding your values in this. Like, do you value being present without those people more? Or do you value your own need to protect yourself against people who are at times toxic? I think families can be very tricky to navigate. And at times we do have to give up traditions and those kinds of ceremonies and moments in order to just protect our own emotions. And it's hard. It's really sad that they people put us in a position where we have to make that decision at times. And so it can feel really stuck. Um, and so I appreciate you sharing that example, Amber, because that can be super overwhelming, especially if blame is being pointed at you. So, thank you for sharing that. It's a little more complicated than a simple answer, but thank you. That's where these are the moments that like I can plug a little bit with Blomquist because um, that's something that in a session we could totally work through. So, um, yeah. Oh yeah, thank you. Jamie just shared that we did there was a webinar recently, and it's on our YouTube page, and the title of it is Grief, the Dance of Loss. And it really is great. It's on our YouTube page, and could be a really good resource. So thank you, Jamie, for throwing that out there. Okay. Okay, so let's look at this. So now, we've got like these skills and tools. What do we do with it? Now that we know how to like write a script and we know how to show up for them and for ourselves, or at least we have the information, Like, now what? So let's look at like how you come up with a plan for it. So I think it's really important when we're going into situations that don't feel like totally comfortable, have safe people. And they may not be at the event. It might just be that you have a safe person that's outside of the event that you can text during the event and be like, these people are driving me crazy. And they can help you kind of navigate that, right? Have a plan with them for how you're going to talk about it. Or maybe you have like a plan that they're going to call you at a certain time so you have an excuse to step out. But then, if you don't answer the phone, it means you're having a good time and you didn't need that out. So whatever that looks like, having that safe person. Um, so also going into it, using these tools and these skills, name the boundaries and expectations that you have. They don't all necessarily need to be communicated because it might just be that you for yourself recognize that, okay, there's these three things that I absolutely cannot tolerate. If they happen, I'm stepping out, or I'm going to step away, or I'm going to put my headphones in, whatever that looks like. We may not always have to communicate. Sorry, we may not always have to communicate what our boundaries are, but being able to share that and provide that is helpful. Um, and have it ready so we know ahead of time what it is and what we're going to do. And ask yourself who needs to know that this is what I'm expecting and who doesn't need to know. Because it might be that expressing that boundary out loud can actually cause conflict at times. Um, and other times it might be that, you know, it really needs to be communicated out loud. Okay. And then make a plan for how you're going to follow through with that. So here's just an example. At the party on Saturday, I know my sister is a safe person. This is like how you can write out the plan for yourself. I know my sister is a safe person. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, I will not talk to my family about politics. That can be tricky. If someone tries to bring it up, I will use Dear Man to explain. If they're not respectful of my request, I will start by moving to a different table with my sister. If it continues, I'll leave the party and I'll make sure I take my own car. Um, oh shoot. Are some people having a hard time hearing?
It looks
Okay,
like it looks like there's a couple people that say they can't, but
okay. There
uh,
was just a disregard, so I think we're good.
okay, cool.
Okay. Okay. So that can just be like a way to have the plan. You don't have to have that all written out necessarily. It doesn't need to be formal, but just knowing for yourself that if this happens, here's how I'm going to respond, and here's what I'm going to do ahead of time to prepare for that. So, it might be my scratchy voice today. That might be why it's kind of hard to for your AI to pick up on things. Sorry. So hopefully that kind of just gives you an idea of things. Does anyone have any other ideas on things you can do ahead of time or like during things to kind of help with any of that? Anyone have any other ideas for like um things you can use to kind of plan for like difficult conversations or things like that you want to throw in? Or any questions? Hey. Well, hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of some tools. It was a lot of information. I know that. There are tons of resources online for these tools. So if you just go to Google and you look up Dear Man, Give, or Fast and GPT skills, and the stop skill, you can find additional information on them. This was just intended to be an overview of kind of how those tools and skills might show up and how you could use them to help in these hard conversations and kind of help you navigate it when you're dealing with conflict with family, friends, coworkers, whatever that looks like. As we kind of go into the busy season that is December. I mean, we're already there, but and then here's some additional resources. The 988 Suicide Hotline is a great resource. The Safe UT app is a great resource. And then Blomquist and Hale has these resources. I know the phone number on here is different than the one that have sorry, Brooklyn shared earlier. But it's still it takes you to the same spot. So and I just want to put an additional plug in for the app. I think that the app is a great resource that is Super helpful. It's got some really good info. It's not just the webinars that are on there, but then there's also just like info sheets with like tips and tricks and tools and things that can be really helpful. So, um, oh, there was one more comment on the chat really quick that I want to read. Sometimes I play out our possible scenarios at home or with my therapist so I'm not caught off guard when something happens. Love that. It builds my confidence that I'll be able to take care of myself in the situation. I completely agree. Like that's why having these tools and preparing ahead of time is so important because we can be so much more confident in those situations. So thank you for sharing. Okay. Well, if anyone has any other questions, throw them in the chat, but I think we're good.